We are now just 31 days from Election Day. 31! And there is still a lot to do. That is why former President Barack Obama will hit the campaign trail for Vice President Harris next week in Pittsburgh. This is the start of a battleground tour that he is launching. As for the Vice President, well, she held events in Detroit and Flint, Michigan yesterday. While there, Harris met with voters from the Muslim and Arab communities. Her campaign is also ramping up outreach to Latino and Black voters. Here's NBA legend Magic Johnson with the vice president urging Black men to show up for the Democratic ticket.
Kamala's opponent promised a lot of things last time to the Black community that he did not deliver on. And we got to make sure we help Black men understand that.
Joining us now is MSNBC political analyst and former Maryland Congresswoman Donna Edwards.
Welcome to you, Congresswoman. So,
do you think some people could read what Magic Johnson said the wrong way? Because I don't want them to read it the wrong way. Because I do think that he was coming from an authentic place, he himself. But
what would he have read wrong?
Well, because I say that because some people, I heard some folks yesterday after this aired, the clips came out. Why is Magic Johnson trying to tell Black men what to do? And I'm like, I didn't read it like that, but.
Well, if you're taking that defensive a posture, then that proves the point that I'm about to ask. Ooh. Because there is a black male problem right now in this race. And I'm just going to put it on the table and go there. There's a tension between black men and black women in this country that no one's really addressing, and it's manifesting in this race in a way that I think is concerning. And I'm curious, because I've been talking to a number of black men and some black women about this and they all agree that this tension is there because it doesn't make sense, the excuses that are being made by some black men, a lot of black men, about not supporting her over Donald Trump. And I think that's what Magic was getting at. How do you see this playing out in that context? Because I think that there are elements there that are not being addressed. Simone addressed it in her special a little bit last week. Everybody's kind of coming at it, but they haven't nailed it yet.
It's such a big question. Look, I think there is probably a tension there between black men and black women, and some of it has to do with the perception, I don't think the reality, but the perception of black women's achievement. More black women going to college, more black women successful, the focus on the black woman vote, and that has created in itself an understandable tension. But look, I think that I believe in what Shirley Chisholm said. Not so much about race as it is about gender, and I don't think that what some black men, and it's not a lot because Kamala Harris has actually done an awful lot to bring black men home. If you look at the polling numbers, they suggest that while Joe Biden was not drawing in black men, Kamala Harris has closed that gap, and now she just needs to put a wrap on it. And I think bringing out people like President Obama, like, Magic Johnson and others is a way to do that. But it doesn't cure that understandable tension. I think it's the reason that Kamala Harris is focused on small business creation. I think it's the reason that she's focused on, building and strengthening communities, because those are things that appeal to black men. But I view this as more a gender problem than it is a race problem.
Your special was invoked, so I feel like I've got to cede the floor to you.
I was like, Lord, we starting off heavy. I can't grab my comment.
He had a donut before the show.
Oh, yeah. Y'all, he brought donuts in, and this is what it was. Okay, look, our special did, it touched on this a little bit, and I think of what Minyon Moore said, who was the chair of the 2024 Democratic Convention, and she said, we have to actually dispel the myth that men, especially black men, are not going to support a woman candidate or a black woman candidate.
We're talking about margins here.
And margin, yes. And I agree with her. She said that you have to create people need to be able to see her as a commander-in-chief. And that is the work that the campaign has to do, in addition to, the policies. People want to see policies. And she said that she believes that the campaign is doing that work. I think that You know what? Maybe this is a radical thing, but I'm not mad that, black men, some younger voters, Latino men, even some black women are saying, you know what? I need to see more because people need to earn my vote. Because for years, one could argue that the consistency at which black voters, specifically in some other demographics, have supported the Democratic Party apparatus, that consistency sometimes could be taken for granted. And I think what you are hearing a swath of people say is, look, now, in our special, we didn't find a number of younger black women or black women across the board who were Trump curious, as Melissa would like to say. But they were just like, I don't know if I'm going to vote at the top of the ticket. And I believe that given the time that is left, from a campaign perspective, you just have to meet the voters where they are. And if that's where they are, you got to meet them and earn their vote. Now, I do think that in the moratorium post, we'll see what the numbers look like. People tried to say in Georgia, remember the Stacey Abrams race? Oh, the black men didn't vote for Stacey Abrams. That was a lie. Black men did vote for Stacey Abrams. That's not why she lost that race. Y'all might want to check on some other demographics, but it wasn't black men.
Well, black men have they've already demonstrated that they're voting for Kamala Harris. And again, it really is about margin. So I think for Kamala Harris, she has to maximize the black vote. She has to do it, obviously, by earning it. But there are a couple of other demographics that she's got to peel into. Let's talk about white women. Okay,
well, that's the biggest Achilles heel in this race that I see, Alicia, is white suburban women are not. It's not a guaranteed vote. Let's just put it that way. I think a lot of folks assume a lot about that vote on the Democratic side. I think Donald Trump in 2016 dispelled folks of that, and then again in 2020 dispelled folks of that. So you've got these twin pillars of challenge that I think go to the core of what you're saying. It's not race necessarily as it is gender. How does America look at a woman, regardless of her race, a woman in the role as commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces, the federal government, and to be the leader of the free world? And I think that's the next level of the challenge that the vice president has. I think she's meeting that challenge personally, and I think she's met it on a number of scales. But I mean, how should we be looking at this election 30 days out? Are we still in that, does she really come off as a commander-in-chief? Or at some point, do we start to focus on the big orange thing in front of you that wants to be a dictator?
Right. I mean, I think her response and her campaign's response, as we know, has been to show rather than tell. For her just to show up as a commander-in-chief, for her to assume that position. I think her performance in the debate was a great example of that. I think it's part of the reason they would like to see another debate. But to your point about why aren't we focusing on Donald Trump, I think in part because what they are hearing from voters is that for people for whom Donald Trump is a motivating factor, their mind has largely been made up in one of two directions. And so now what they are trying to do is to fill the void with the voters for whom that is not enough. I want to take a listen to an ad that the campaign is running, particularly focused on black voters. But I would argue, and we'll talk about it on the other side, that the message appeals to every electorate. Take a listen.
I get it. The cost of rent, groceries, and utilities is too high. So here's what we're going to do about it. We will lower housing costs by building more homes and crack down on landlords who are charging too much. We will lower your food and grocery bills by going after price gougers who are keeping the cost of everyday goods too high. I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message because you work hard for your paycheck. You should get to keep more of it. As president, I'll make that my top priority.
Here's what I find interesting about that ad, which is that ad we know is meant to target black voters. One of the reasons we know that is because all of the people in the ad are themselves black. But you could grab that message and apply it, to your point, to white women who still need to be persuaded. And that is the issue. When you get past style and get to substance, that's what everybody's talking about.
Well, and to Simone's point, meet the voters where they are. They're concerned about inflation. They're concerned about the cost of groceries. They're concerned about making a life for their families. You saw a family in there. You saw a family that was obviously in the suburbs in that ad. And I think, to your point, it does have a broader appeal. It puts black families, frankly, in the light that we all know. We're not a monolith, and we're just like every other family out there concerned about the same thing.
And we do live in the suburbs.
Yes, we do live in the suburbs.
So I just want to let people know.
Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, where we did the kitchen conversation, was in the suburbs.
Right.
And I know Liz Cheney and them going to Montgomery County this upcoming week. So I'm just saying, black women are in the suburbs too. Can I just note though that there's still work to do. I'm struck by the NAACP. They're spending $3.75 million on a radio ad. They're doing all this organizing work. There are some voters that are undecided or need to be convinced to come out. And it's not undecided between Trump and Kamala Harris. Undecided if their vote matters. And you got to speak to that, too.
All right, Donna, stick with us. Up next, Liz Cheney joins Vice President Harris on the campaign trail for the first time.
I have an Article 2 where I have the right to do whatever I want as president, but I don't even talk about that.
That was President Donald Trump in July of 2019 offering his take on the constitutional limits of the presidency. His take is that the limit does not exist. 5 years later, in July of this year, the Supreme Court handed down its ruling on Trump v. United States, and they sided with Trump. Presidents were deemed immune from criminal prosecution for official acts, a term the court chose not to define. Trump and the court's conservative majority were in lockstep with one another, but out of step with 2 centuries of constitutional precedent. As Justice Sotomayor wrote in her dissent, quote, "The relationship between the president and the people he serves has shifted irrevocably. In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law," end quote. And according to Project 2025, the conservative playbook for a second Trump presidency, the president should be a king, with every lever of government serving him alone. Project 2025 vows to slash the federal workforce and replace what's left of it with Trump loyalists. That's because all sorts of policy laid out in this handbook would be impossible to implement without loyalty to a president and an administration, not to the Constitution, across the government. Especially because some of its plans are so radical that pesky things like, say, expertise would simply get in the way of implementing them. On page 21, Project 2025 says, quote, "The next administration must not cede such authority to nonpartisan experts," end quote. Project 2025 plans on achieving that goal by removing protections for thousands of career civil servants, often experts in their field, and replacing them with politically loyal appointees who answer only to the president. So picture, hypothetically speaking, a scientist who studies the effects of chemicals in our water being replaced with someone who has no scientific background but a solid track record of supporting Trump's ideas. Across the 900-plus pages of Project 2025, this strategy is spoken in code. On page 552, for example, they suggest, quote, "The director of the FBI must remain politically accountable to the president," end quote. Politically accountable is code for obedient. That's what we want, an FBI that works at the whims of the president, arresting his political opponents, journalists, prosecutors, critics, even judges who don't do his bidding. Remember, one of Trump's first big scandals as president was firing FBI Director James Comey for not publicly saying Trump was not under investigation in the Russia probe, according to the Mueller report. Political appointees, Project 2025 code for our guys, are to replace civil servants at every level possible. That would leave Trump unchecked if enabled to go after his perceived enemies, which he has promised to do time and again on the campaign trail. Political appointees, a.k.a. Trump's would-be goons, are mentioned in this 922-page book 99 times. In the chapter on Homeland Security on page 136, Project 2025 suggests that when a leadership role is vacated and the next person in line is a career civil servant, they should be passed up in favor of a political appointee. On page 45, when discussing the kind of person who should run the Office of Budget and Management, Project 2025 writes, quote, "No director should be chosen who is not aggressive in wielding the tool on behalf of the president's agenda or who is unable to defend the power against attacks from Congress," end quote. Attacks from Congress should be the telltale sign here that no one involved in Project 2025 has any interest in a government of checks and balances. Congress is a co-equal branch of government, according to our Constitution, but according to Project 2025, Congress should bug off, too. In the chapter on the State Department, it's put more bluntly. Page 173 says, quote, "The main suggestion here is that as many political appointees as possible should be in place at the start of a new administration," end quote. Transforming our federal government from groups of qualified experts to unblinking yes men will mean serious breakdowns in our government's ability to serve. For example, when Americans need crucial aid from federal agencies, the difference between civil service servants and political appointees shows. Just days ago, a former policy director on the National Security Council during the Trump presidency revealed that Trump initially refused to approve disaster aid for California during its deadly 2018 wildfires. The official told Politico's E&E News, quote, "We went as far as looking up how many votes he got in those impacted areas to show him that these are people who voted for you," end quote. Trump wound up reversing his decision. The playbook makes 4 promises for the next conservative presidency, number 2 being to, quote, "dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people," end quote. So the architects of Project 2025 were overjoyed when the Supreme Court assisted them in this effort, too, by overturning the 40-year-old precedent of the Chevron doctrine, which allowed federal agencies broad ability to interpret and enforce regulations. With the administrative state left weaker than it's been in 4 decades, the time is ripe for the broad structural changes that Project 2025 is seeking. In concert with the Supreme Court's summer decisions, Project 2025 seeks to create a federal government that answers only to the president, and a president who answers to no one. Before the break, I told you about how Project 2025's plans to expand the power of the president, combined with the Supreme Court's presidential immunity decision, could result in a truly unchecked Trump administration. For more on this, I'm joined by Kim Whaley, a former United States attorney, professor of law at the University of Baltimore, and the author of Pardon, How the Pardon System Works and Why. Kim, great to see you again. Thank you for joining us today. You know, we parse Project 2025. We go topic by topic, but this is a thing that's sort of all over it, and in combination with the Supreme Court basically saying that all sorts of things are official acts and the president is not accountable for them. I worry about, this isn't it's not about abortion. It's not about the environment. It's specifically about the fact that the president can do a lot more than a constrained president as designed by the framers can do.
Right. I mean, you mentioned Justice Sotomayor saying that the court converted the presidency into that of a king. And I think it's probably accurate. When you think about a king, Ali, in common law England, the idea was it's like a triangle. And the power comes from the divine to the king, and the king can do whatever the king wants. The American revolutionaries fought a war to flip the triangle, to invert the triangle. The people are in charge, and the power trickles down. So Donald Trump's statement in 2019 that he had, under Article 2, could do whatever he wants is just not true. Every branch gets their papers checked by the other 2 branches. We saw this if you've seen the Hamilton musical. But the Supreme Court, in giving the president the power to commit crimes using the official office power, right? If he pulls out his handgun, his personal handgun, maybe he can be prosecuted. But if he uses SEAL Team 6, then somehow that is immune from any review. It's that kind of power. It's the official power that has the possibility of really limiting people's liberties. That's the stuff we should really worry about. And the court just took the rug right out from underneath the American people in that.
I want to discuss Project 2025's very overt discussions about politicizing the federal workforce. They're talking about firing 50,000 people, possibly, and hiring people on the basis of what is essentially a loyalty pledge to the presidency, not to the Constitution, which is what every federal employee pledges loyalty to at the moment. What's the effect of a politicized federal workforce? We've seen examples around the world where it just doesn't work. If your fealty is to a party or to a president or a prime minister, that's not the same as having fealty to your country.
Well, I think there's 2 pieces, and a lot of people, when listening to this conversation, wonder, how is this going to affect me? But you can just Google the employment application, the loyalty test for being in a Trump administration. It's quite terrifying. In addition, ProPublica just published a piece on how there are FOIA requests being done, inundated with Freedom of Information Act requests, some of these agencies to weed out the people that are not loyal. So this is going to affect regular workers. The second piece, as you indicate, is the idea behind the agencies is that they're experts. Do you really want a politician deciding how to store plutonium for nuclear reactors? No, you want a scientist doing that. But this gets beyond just science. Think about the Federal Communications Commission. They issue licenses for broadcast journalists. Do you really want politicians deciding who gets or does not get licenses, who gets punished for their speech through that process? It's very damaging, and it'll impact every single American, which is frankly why the framers said no more kings. If they believed we just didn't have to worry about it, they wouldn't have gone to the hassle of having a revolution and creating a constitution in 1787 in Philadelphia.
We got more details from Jack Smith's case this week, and it's not directly tied to Project 2025, but knowing those details, how much damage could be done if the entire government served the president as opposed to the country and the Constitution?
Well, again, it's that idea of unlimited power, the notion that not only did the Supreme Court say you could use your military power, FBI, CIA, the IRS to investigate, spyware, all of that can be used now to commit crimes. The Supreme Court acknowledged that's what they are greenlighting, but also the court said, and you can't use that evidence of the official acts in a prosecution. So this could be not only widespread crimes, but we wouldn't even know about it, Ali. So it will be, again, that it could be that triangle. The haves and the have-nots, the winners and the losers are based on arbitrary criteria, not fairness. And as much as it's impossible to achieve complete equality, the idea behind the Constitution is there are processes to ensure it's not arbitrary winners and losers based on political loyalty. My deepest concern is that Americans will feel chilled. They'll feel chilled in who they talk to, who they associate with, what they post on social media, that there'll be retaliation. And when we can't speak, Ali, we can't think freely. And that's when we really lose our humanity. Everything's on the line in November.
Kim, good to talk to you as always. Thank you for joining us. Kim Whaley is the University of Baltimore School of Law professor, author of Pardon Power, How the Pardon System Works and Why.
Welcome back to The Weekend. Donald Trump resorted to crimes to try to stay in office after the 2020 election. That's what Special Counsel Jack Smith argues in a shell filing recently unsealed, putting Trump's legal woes back in the spotlight just 1 month before the 2024 election. Smith's filing insists that Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election were not official acts and don't fall under the scope of the Supreme Court's presidential immunity ruling. The 165-page redacted document reveals new and disturbing details of Trump's efforts to cling to power in the weeks after losing the 2020 election. Joining us now is conservative lawyer George Conway. Welcome back to the table, my friend.
Happy to be here. Always fun.
So among those details, a little bit more on the way that the former president felt about his own vice president. Upon receiving a phone call alerting him that Pence had been taken to a secure location, person 15 rushed to the dining room to inform the defendant in hopes that the defendant would take action to ensure Pence's safety. Instead, after P15 delivered the news, the defendant looked at him and said, only, quote, so what?
It's classic Donald Trump. Cares about nobody, nothing other than himself. It's all about him. Doesn't matter whether people got hurt or are going to get hurt. On January 6th, it didn't matter that his vice president, who'd been loyal to him for 3.5 years or 4 years, might be in danger. He doesn't care. He's a sociopath. And that's just more evidence of that man, of Donald Trump's sickness, a sickness that we can't allow, as Liz Cheney put it so well this week. I mean, we can't allow a man completely lacking in compassion and decency to be president again. So.
How, George, help us understand a little bit better. I mean, based off of what you just said, and Alicia sort of framing this question the way she did, why then do people out there not weigh that? I mean, when did along the way did we change the idea that, an individual with these psychopathies and these, sociopathic behaviors, that's what we now see in a president, and we're okay with that?
Yeah, I think the problem is that And the real danger of narcissistic sociopaths like this man, like coming into office, they create a permission structure for other people to be their worst selves. We all have choices every day on whether to do right or to do wrong, or to speak a lie or to tell the truth. And he gives everybody permission to do the very worst things, because they look and say, well, if he can do it and I'm with him, I can do it. And that is a truly corrosive effect that having a man like this in our public, even beyond the question of right, left, and policy, this is the true danger of having a person like this as a leader in public life.
I mean, as you were speaking, I just thought about Mark Robinson. I thought about the congressman from Louisiana that tweeted that always has a little racist tweets, but tweeted recently about Haitian people in this country. I think about all of these candidates and individuals in elected office that have now popped up
out of nowhere, just seemingly right there.
Because Donald Trump has given them this permission structure.
They want to be like him. And people say it's okay. It doesn't matter.
The words that Donald Trump has been speaking even throughout this whole time show up in this filing from Jack Smith along those lines. Like he writes, in the years after January 6th, the defendant, Donald Trump, reiterated his support for and allegiance to rioters who broke into the Capitol, calling them patriots and hostages, providing them financial assistance, and reminiscing about January 6th as a beautiful day. The defendant has also stated that if reelected, he will pardon individuals convicted of crimes on January 6th. Jack Smith is basically saying, well, one, he's basically saying, like, look, he didn't say all this stuff. This is also why I think my case is strong. But also, I also think this is, people should read this as he is telling us what he's going to do, people. Take Donald Trump at his word, okay? This isn't just hyperbole, because I think a lot of people excuse it as, that's just how he talks, but he doesn't really mean it. I think he means it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this piece of evidence has both retrospective effect and a prospective. The retrospective effect is the evidentiary value that Jack Smith sees in it, which shows the man's intent. The man's intent was to destroy our republic. And then in the future, that's the perspective messages to the public that people can glean from public filings like this that explain what's going on or what happened in the past. They can say, wait a minute, this person will do it again. And that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Here's part of why I think that becomes particularly relevant, which is there was that moment in the vice presidential debate that we all caught towards the end of the debate where J.D. Vance was asked about what happened about the election in 2020, what happened on January 6th, sort of pretends January 6th didn't happen. And I think for all of us who care about democracy, it was a catch your breath moment of,
clarity. Yeah.
Yes, of clarity, yes. But we all know someone who was like, why are we talking about 2020? Why are we talking about something that happened 4 years ago? And so to me, part of what is in this filing is answering that question. It's because we're not only looking at things that happened, we are looking at things that he plans to do in the future. Don't take Jack Smith's word for it. Take the ex-president at his own word.
Right. Yeah, I think that for me is the critical point. And that moment in the debate should have been clarifying. But the fact, to your point, Alicia, that people go, well, why are we still talking about January 20th? Well, we're talking about it because, as Simone just read, the defendant has stated that if reelected, he will pardon individuals convicted of crimes on January 6th. The defendant, has hailed this as a beautiful day. So we can't dismiss that. We can't just push under the rug the fact that a former president of the United States literally tried to steal our Constitution away from us, tear it up, and create something else right in front of our eyes.
It's why there's a case. They tried to steal an election. They tried to steal an election.
Right, and the fact is that J.D. Waltz got that in on the last drive of the debate. But that's, Coach Waltz, that's the whole point.
That's the whole point.
I mean, I used to care a lot about marginal tax rates. I used to care about a lot of it. Okay? Well, marginal tax rates don't do me any good if I don't live in a free country.
Come on.
So what the only issue that mattered was that last 5 minutes of the debate.
And I still don't understand why it's like pulling teeth with with about 47% of the country, and of that 47%, they're all not MAGA, they're all not hardcore. So I'm like, what is the trigger then to get you to see in a clarifying moment that that's the core of what this election is about?
Here's the thing. I think there's an exhaustion factor creeping in. I mean, maybe it's anecdotal from people saying that they're looking at these crowds and looking for yard signs, but you don't feel that level of energy that they had before. And I think his own base is exhausted. And I think the whole country is exhausted by him. Exhausted. But the people who want to vote him out, who have been against him all along, and the people who've come to understand his true evil, I mean, those people are motivated to get out. The other people who are sick of him are his own people, and it's like, all right, I don't want to go to another rally. Do I have to get up on Election Day?
And when they go,
how many envelopes do I have to? Oh, these envelopes are bad.
Right.
I'm not going to vote.
Right.
There was a story about that this week, and now I'm blanking on where I read it. But they went in. These reporters went to a Trump rally and then asked the people who were leaving why they were leaving. And one woman said, "Well, he was an hour late. Okay, so you don't have the decency to come on time. I'm leaving." And then they said it was just nasty, and the ranting and the vitriol. And one woman came with a friend of hers or a family member that's voting for Kamala Harris, and she left. She's like, "Well, dang it, I'm voting for Kamala Harris too now." So to your point, a number of people are fed up. I mean, Alicia,
you can also only hear.
It was the Washington Post, by the way.
Before you're like, I can't. One more time. Here's where I would sort of tie these things together. To your point about fatigue, I think there's political fatigue. I also think there's the fatigue that we often come back to at this table, which is the fatigue with the lack of accountability.
Yeah.
And so I want you to sort of put on your attorney hat and pull back the curtain for me on what you think Jack Smith's strategy was here, understanding that he's not going to be able to prosecute any of these cases against Donald Trump in time for this election.
Well, look, I mean, he should be prosecuting this case early next year. This case is going to go to trial if Trump is not elected president. And the Supreme Court, the whole proceedings with these appeals from the D.C. Circuit to the Supreme Court, that took 6 or 7 months. And then, they passed through the summer. It's time for the proceedings that the Supreme Court directed and that Donald Trump asked for, by the way, start for real, because the Supreme Court ruled back in June. And, Jack Smith is not, it doesn't look like he's in a terrible hurry, but I'm happy that he was able to file this thing before the election.
And I think it's also this, I know we're going to go to a quick break, but I think it's also important to note that we are here, right, because Donald Trump's lawyers pushed us into this space, because we could have been past this by now. But that strategy of, delay, appeal on every little thing over and over again pushes these cases back. So now to hear Donald Trump and his ilk whining like little babies about the fact that this is put out in front of the country again, this is the clock you set. This could have been resolved in August. It could have been resolved in June. But no, you wanted it here. So now Jack Smith is like, okay.
The district judge is going like this. This is it. Doing it, just proceeding in the normal course.
From North Carolina, we now go to Georgia. Joining me now is Democratic Congresswoman Lucy McBath. Congresswoman, it's always good to see you. But both President Biden and Vice President Harris were in Georgia this week, where Governor Brian Kemp says there have been at least 33 deaths related to Hurricane Helene, including the youngest known victims of the storm, a pair of 5-week-old twin boys who died in their mother's arms as a tree fell on her bedroom in a small town of near Augusta. Nearly 4 dozen of the state's counties are under major disaster declaration, while thousands remain without power in Georgia's eastern and southern regions. How are your constituents in the Atlanta area doing tonight?
Well, thank you so much, Reverend Al. And Hurricane Helene was so detrimental for the way of life for so many people here in the state of Georgia. And I have just been heartbroken to see and hear the stories of so many that have been impacted. They've lost their homes, their lives have been uprooted, and businesses have been washed away. And I did sign a letter to the president urging the administration to immediately make sure that they are considering additional support for all of the affected areas that really need it. And I've been grateful to work with my colleagues here in Georgia, both our senators and my congressional colleagues in the state, to make sure that our communities are getting the aid that they need. But there's still so much work yet that needs to be done. And we just continue to make sure that we're doing what we can to be as effective and expediting those resources as quickly as we possibly can.
Now, Congresswoman, how concerned are you that the damage done by Hurricane Helene coming so close to Election Day will interfere with the vote in the states for the states most affected? And with 4 weeks left, what role can the federal government play in protecting access to voting as it renders aid at the same time?
Well, you pose a really good question. We know that there has been a lot of movement towards voter suppression here. You're adding on the additional layers of concerns that people are having about, taking care of their families and their livelihoods and their homes in the wake of the hurricane. So those are additional stressors that will add to people's ability to be able to vote. But I do know that the administration continues to do what they can do. We know that Harris and Walz both have been here in Georgia. They've been around the states. They've been around the country doing everything that they need to do. I'm not a legal expert, but I do know that what we've seen here in Georgia, Donald Trump's acolytes, on the state election board, they've been trying to pave the way for him once again to infuse chaos in our elections. And so with the added stressors of the hurricane, that's just going to add more stress. But I'm the daughter of civil rights leaders who marched in the civil rights movement. And as I've said before, I was a child in the stroller at the March on Washington at 3 years of age. And the rules that operate in a way that undermines all of the work that we have done here in Georgia, all the work that we've done all around the country, we're not going to let anything undermine our ability to make sure that all of our citizens, no matter what circumstances they're in, have the ability to exercise their right to vote. We must not allow any bad actors to tear our democracy apart, and we will continue to do what we need to do to help those individuals that have been in this crisis with the hurricane still exercise their right to vote.
Now, staying with the election and election interference this week, state and national Democrats filed a joint lawsuit against Georgia's MAGA Republican-dominated Board of Elections over a new rule that demands additional polling personnel in every county to hand count ballots following a machine count. Then Georgia Democrats asked a Fulton County judge to block additional rule changes that could allow county election officials to delay certification. Now, voter advocates and critics of the new rules say they're designed to benefit Donald Trump in Georgia. We should add, those critics include even some top state Republican officials. Are you concerned about these changes? And if so, what worries you most, Congresswoman McBath?
Well, of course, Reverend Allen, I'm very concerned about the changes. These are last-minute changes, and we know that last-minute changes really have a great impact on the ability for people to exercise their right to vote. And as I just said before, these last-minute changes are paving the way for Trump to be able to pave his way to be able to, create chaos in our elections. You know how close the election was for the Biden-Harris administration here in Washington before. We know what happened with the 11,000 some odd votes before. So we've seen this playbook before, and we will continue to make sure that we do everything that we can do, everything that we've done before, to make sure that every individual in the state of Georgia has the ability to access the ballot box. We're watching very closely. We have election attorneys here. We have people who are really volunteering in mass numbers to make sure that we have fair and free elections. We will continue to do as we've always done. The rules that we see right now are undermining our ability to be able to do so. but we will overcome those rules because we know how important it is that people exercise their right to vote. This is the bastion of the civil rights movement. So many of our icons fought so hard to make sure that people have access to the ballot box. So we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that that's possible.
People gave their lives to give us access to the ballot box. And to see this, when you refer to 11,000 votes, you're referring to former President Trump asking Georgia officials just find him 11,000 some odd votes. That's part of his indictment in the state of Georgia. Before we wrap up, though, Congresswoman, the U.S. added 254,000 new jobs in September, according to this week's Fed report. Unemployment sits at just 4.1%. That's the biggest job growth since March, and about 100,000 jobs more than what economists expected. Yet, despite months of numbers like these, the economy continues to be a primary concern for voters. How does the vice president beat back against the gloom and capitalize on these economic headwinds with just a month left to make her final pitch?
Well, Reverend Al, I was a single mother for about 12, 13 years as I was raising my son Jordan here. And I know how important it is to be able to make ends meet and to be able to raise your children and keep food on the table. But the latest jobs report is overall really great news for our workers and for the American economy. It shows strength and it shows hope. And that is exactly what Vice President Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are giving the American people. They're giving us hope. The Biden-Harris administration has created 16 million jobs as, these are the recent numbers that we've just been told. So there is hope. There is a building of a strong economy going forward. So our work continues in Congress to keep making sure that our economy and our nation's economy is strong. That is our role, but I have no doubt that what the Biden-Harris administration has done, the foundations that they've laid, it will be executed when she is president as well. So this is good news for America. This is good news for our economy. This is good news for our workers. And I hope that we're able to continue to build upon what we've been doing.
All right. Thank you, as always, for being with us, Congresswoman Lucy McBath of Georgia.
The labor sector is playing a big role in this 2024 election. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are battling for the support of different unions. Wrapping up just moments ago, Senator Bernie Sanders and the president of the United Auto Workers, Shawn Fain, hosted a rally in support of the Harris campaign. It was billed as a rally against corporate greed. Shawn Fain, the president of the United Auto Workers, joins me now. Shawn, good to see you.
Hey, good to see you, Ali. Thanks for having me.
Talk to me about your shirt, Kill NAFTA.
It's just, look, we've all lived this. We've seen, since NAFTA's inception and 90,000 manufacturing plants roughly leave the United States. And that's what's hurt the working class in this country for decades. And, we've got to move forward. We've got to fight for these jobs. And that's the one thing I'll say about Kamala Harris and the Biden administration. They're the first administration in my lifetime that have employed, a plan for manufacturing. Over 20 plants are being built in this country right now. Many plants have already been built under their administration, bringing jobs, keeping jobs in America, and bringing more jobs to America. Workers that Donald Trump left behind in Lordstown, Ohio, when the GM plant there closed. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, with their plan, built a battery plant there, Ultium Batteries, and hundreds of those workers from that Lordstown plant that were left behind are now returning home to Lordstown because of the work Kamala Harris has done.
So let's talk about what Donald Trump is talking about. He's talking about tariffs. Obviously, for you and the UAW and auto workers, you would like to protect and build, as you said, more plants here, more manufacturing for cars. You'd like other countries, if they're going to build cars, to come and make their plants here. At the same time, you do not want to be in a trade war where people put those tariffs on U.S.-built cars. So how do you think about tariffs and where we should be in terms of trade agreements and tariffs?
Well, look, I mean, it's pretty apparent that these trade deals have not, NAFTA especially, has not worked for American auto workers or American workers in general in any industry. And so my opinion on NAFTA is simply this, and some of these trade deals, it's up for, to review again in 2026. In my opinion, if things don't change or we don't frame it to where it actually works for us and doesn't decimate our manufacturing base, then we have to abandon it. And tariffs are nice. Tariffs, can work for the interim, but again, it will start a trade war. Again, we've seen that. But at the end of the day, I think we just have to look at these trade agreements. If they do not work, we have to get out. Because all we've seen as a result of NAFTA is, 90,000 manufacturing plants leave this country. And the other part of that is, I always hear, people like to throw out there that Clinton passed NAFTA. Clinton didn't pass NAFTA. George Bush started NAFTA. We had a Republican majority in Congress that pushed it. Clinton signed it. Clinton should have vetoed it. I didn't vote for Bill Clinton for that reason back in those days, but Democrats didn't pass it. The only people talking against it at that time were Democrats. And so, we've got to put working class people first. And, this whole fight is about corporate greed. No matter if there's trade laws, no matter if there's tariffs, the corporate world, the global corporate world is always going to be chasing the cheapest dollar. They're going to try to exploit workers wherever they can. That's what we got to stop. We got to bring living standards up, not just in America, but globally, so that, we don't have that type of threat and that corporations can't abuse working class people like they do.
We've had a remarkable year as it relates to collective bargaining. We had the president show up on your picket lines at the UAW. We saw the Teamsters strike averted. We saw the end of a very long strike with the Writers Guild, but with some real gains made by them. We saw the SAG-AFTRA strike resolved. You have called Donald Trump a scab, and the UAW called for a National Labor Relations Board investigation into comments that he and Elon Musk made on social media discussing firing striking workers, which would be illegal. What's the update on that? But B, there's a deeper issue here, and it's the type of message that we're sending to American workers when Donald Trump says things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's who he is. As Kamala Harris so eloquently put, when people tell you who they are, believe them. And, it's all in Donald Trump's track record. Donald Trump likes to talk about the auto worker, and he's going to bring the jobs back. He was president. He didn't do anything to bring jobs back. Factory under his watch, and he did nothing. And it's the same thing. He talks about he stands with workers, with our members. He sits there, and then he sits there with Elon Musk and calls Elon the greatest cutter and celebrates him, and they're laughing about the fact that he fired striking workers. I tell our members this all the time. If Donald Trump was president, there would have been no stand-up strike. They would have fired us all. That's who he is. He doesn't give a damn about working class people, never has and never will. He represents the corporate class and the billionaire class, and that's all he represents. So we call him a scab because, scabs are people that break strikes, that cross picket lines. Donald Trump has walked across picket lines before in his own building, in his own business, and he talks about firing striking workers. So Donald Trump is a scab. It's exactly what he is.
Sean, good to see you as always. Thanks for making time for us this morning. Shawn Fain is the president of the United Auto Workers Union.